You are listening to The Last Fireflies, a radical climate podcast bringing you discussions of climate science and activism from all around Europe. We are back with another Campfire Talk episode. It's me today on behalf of the pod. I'm Robbie. And our guests today are Sinan and Bea, who are involved in the climate justice movement in Portugal and Italy. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And before we kick things off, do you want to say a few things about yourself?
Yeah, of course, I can start. I'm Beatrice, I'm from Italy, and I'm actually involved in Ultima Generazione, which is the last generation in Italy, and also I joined the All-In project a few months ago. And I'm currently active in my Italian organization, like 80% of my time, I don't know. And then I do extra jobs to survive. This is who I am.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Sinan. I am originally from Turkey, but I live in Lisbon for 15 years now. Most of my militancy happens in a climate justice collective called Climaximo that's based in Lisbon. But I have been involved in a bunch of other things, like for 20 years or more, on different fronts and different types of movements in different parts of the world. In all of these cases, I had specific taste for international stuff. So I was doing most of the networking and coalition building at the international level and so on. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for offering us your time and energy to record this together. So a while ago, I think last year or 2 years ago, we had a discussion with you, Sinan, on Lenashix Radio, which is another podcast that I'm hosting. I do recommend people to listen to that episode if they want. We are going to touch on a bit different stuff here, but connected. And there's a lot of stuff that actually stuck with me after that discussion. One of them was, you said, Sinan, that one of your foundational books, let's say, is Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything. And that actually it took you some time for the title and the message of the book to actually reach you. The idea that the climate crisis changes everything. And I kept reflecting on that and trying to answer for myself, what moves me and how do I relate to the issue. And I think for me personally, especially with this relatively new information about climate tipping points on one hand, which add this kind of quality of irreversibility to many of the changes that happen. And also the issue of this accelerated warming, which we have talked about on other episodes, which also compresses the timeline, the deadlines for acting. And so for me, these two things, with also all the other information, they really kind of changed my perspective and really got me, wanting to get involved in the climate struggle and like dedicating my, life's energy to this struggle, not just being involved, quote unquote. And yeah, I was just thinking that we could maybe start the discussion from this if you want to reflect back on that and answer maybe for yourselves. What is kind of your starting point, how bad and urgent things are, and given this knowledge, what drives you to focus on the climate struggle?
Yeah, I can start sharing my story. I think that I was worried about climate change since I was 12, more or less. So that means 20 years ago, because I think that information were already available, to a certain extent. And then, as many people, I refused to really think about it, or I just adopted good personal habits, so not using many plastics, not driving so far, etc. But of course, it was just really light personal change. And then in October 2017, I was doing my last exams at university in Turin, which is in the northwest of Italy. And in that specific year, there was a huge dryness, which is really, really weird for my region since we are really close to the Alps. And then in the autumn, there were a lot of fires, which again is completely strange in that region. We never suffered of water scarcity or fires. And in that specific period, there were so many fires all around my city that essentially there was a lot of smoke inside the city. And I remember going to my university when I was going to give my last exam. And I remember that I could not see the end of the corridor because of all the smoke that was appearing in the city from the valleys which were around the city. And so for me, it was really a moment where I simply woke up again. And for me, it was like, hey, what the fuck? And what am I really going to do with this paper and with my career or whatever I thought for my future? Because that is happening now. It's happening in my personal life and it's going faster than I expected. So this is what really brought me for the first time in activism and also looking for projects and people that were involved and wanted to do something. And I think that my personal impression hasn't changed so much from that year. Of course, the information and all the scientific data are becoming more and more catastrophic in the sense that the situation is catastrophic. The data are simply realistic. But I also think that if people open their eyes and connect to their daily lives, there are so many signs that are already present, and we don't really need to look for many other information, you know. I think that the situation is simply a disaster at the moment, and we are touching with our eyes the effects already.
So the catalyst for our discussion, or the context, or the catalyst, how you want to call it, is this book that you published. On the book cover, it says Sinan and Mariana Rodrigues. But I'm sure that it's not just two people who worked on the book. It's a bigger team and the collective. And also the analysis that is captured in the book is based on the experiences of being active in your groups and organizing with your groups. So all of that is captured in this book. And the title is All In, a Revolutionary Theory to Stop Climate Collapse. And I was thinking we can structure the discussion by unpacking the title. First of all, why did you put this title All In? What do you mean by it?
Yeah, so connecting to your previous question about like urgency and that this changes everything kind of logic is that there is a very short distance between Naomi Klein's "this changes everything," the statement, and the statement "all in." Because in the other book, which is I think now 12 years old or something, Naomi Klein basically says the climate information that is coming to all of our struggles changes the framework in which we are supposed to think about the world. Like if you want to make sense of stuff, if you want to make meaningful strategy, if you want to make meaningful political activity, climate change gives us an information that wasn't there before. And if it wasn't here now, also our frameworks would still need to be updated, but they wouldn't be qualitatively different. So All In here makes the question of climate emergency bringing not some sort of, say, ecological or environmental disaster, which it will, but that's not the interesting information here. The interesting information is this irreversible dynamics, the tipping points around it that cascade on top of each other and create some sort of like runaway climate change. So these are worse, right? Domino effect and so on. So these make sure at some point, not very specific point, but it's still there, that from some point on, the struggle is not really winnable in the same terms. And this is new. This is new information. You wouldn't think in these terms about any other struggle. But now, because of climate emergency and because, this is it's caused by capitalism and so on, like that it lives in this world, it means that it's not just that you can't win the climate struggle later, but because of the climate crisis, you can't win any of the struggles later because of how the interconnected things are, right? So that puts everything on the table. That's the all in. And the other side already put all this on board, put everything on the table already. Now we're going to answer. Now, the point is, because we were talking about like survival and so on, there's no option of folding. Folding is like Elon Musk saying, can I live in Mars? Or Bill Gates saying, could I just live in bunkers in Hawaii? Like that's the folding that somehow is available. And that's available for a very limited amount of people. So for all the rest of us, it's a challenge. It's a question like, what will you do about this? And it also poses a question more specifically to movement organizers who are thinking about how can we change the world, because now you really have to go all in, because that's the game that we are playing at the moment. Because we're alive now, and this is the context that we're in.
Another way I sometimes like to think about it is like, we all we all have our jobs. For those of us who have day jobs, we go into the office and type away, debug our code, whatever, lead our stupid little daily tasks and pay the social contributions for our pension and whatever. But at the same time, the path on which we are going, the future by the time you would get that pension would be so radically different that we couldn't even imagine it maybe. And to me, that feels kind of a disconnect. And this is the way I also interpreted this term all in, to not hide behind these kinds of, I don't know how to call it.
Yeah, that is obviously a situation, but that's kind of for me a more like a social emergencies situation, let's say. But then the climate is not that interesting because then really many parts of the world, the global north, for instance, racism is more urgent than that because you can't even, go to work and come back safely because of racism. So in some cases, it's not just like you want to do activism and you can't do it or doesn't correspond to your daily routine, but it's more like even your daily routine, like your basic survival is in question. And then we can go back to, indigenous struggles and colonization and so on, where we can find other kinds of real life survival emergencies that are embedded into people's lives. So I think that angle is interesting about climate change, particularly not because of the current suffering, but because most of the time, for most of the struggles, the future cannot be calculated as precisely as in climate crisis. So in climate crisis, of course, there are choices that humanity is making, societies are making, and ruling classes are making even, but also the working class is making. So it's not really predetermined, but it's still like, if the following choices are made, here are the results. Like that's not really as computable in other cases than in this one. So in that way, I relate to what you're saying in terms of like, what the hell am I doing here? Right? I think that is really interesting. I don't know, Bia, how do you handle this kind of daily contradictions?
I can share my experience. As I said, my actual personal adaptation to that is that I don't read any new data about climate, which maybe seems weird, but I think that when common people read them, the normal human effect is just to try to ignore them, no? Because they are so terrible that you get just paralyzed, and then you don't really go into action and then you don't really try to change anything. So I totally agreed with Sinan how we should relate to climate crisis, because we receive objective information on how the situation is going to evolve unless we change the system in a really, really short amount of time. But yeah, I think that at the end in daily life, it's not really going to make me feel better. I didn't answer your question, but I wanted to also to bring this angle.
No, it's good. The goal is not to get some answer that I thought of, but to hear how you engage with these questions for yourselves. I think that's also interesting for the listeners.
Yeah, I can tell that for my personal life, for me, it's becoming more and more and more difficult to plan anything on my future, because every time it's like, okay, my city is going to be unlivable in 20 years. So where should I go? Or yeah, maybe I will lose my job because climate crisis. Okay, so what should I do, etc. So yeah, it's going to really affect every aspect of our lives. No.
So to move forward, then this is kind of the reality that we are inhabiting, and then what should we do about it? To say it like that. And with that, we get to the second part of the title of the book, which is a revolutionary theory to stop climate collapse. Do you want to give us some description or like some elements of what your analysis says and what that theory is or could be?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, at least I can try. So I guess when we say a revolutionary theory to stop climate collapse, by revolutionary theory, what do we mean? We didn't invent this word. This existed for 100 years. But the point is, you answer, I guess, two sets of questions. So one set of questions is, what's going on? A sober analysis of where we are at. And that includes a distinction between what matters and what doesn't matter. Like what elements of what's going on essential to understand, like get a comprehension of what is to come, and what are elements are rather secondary or we don't have to focus at the moment. So that's one side, what's going on. And the second is how to get from here to there, whatever the desired outcome is. And in this case, of climate collapse, it could be end capitalism and so on. So there the question is, what is an algorithm that can bring the desired change? And here I used algorithm. I'm not sure if we use it in the book directly, but I like using the word algorithm, even though when it looks very linear, because algorithm to me brings in two elements that we, as movement organizers, we have been avoiding. So an algorithm is very operational. You can see the steps, right? It gives you the steps. We need that kind of clarity. And second, an algorithm is refutable. Because of how operational it is, I can test it and I can see to what extent it works, what doesn't work, and move forward. So it's very materialistic definition of change. And it's not just like, oh, these certain things should happen, but more like, here are some observable steps that can give me the world that I want. An algorithm allows you to distinguish what elements of reality are central and what elements of reality are not central. So it also comes with a set of strategic priorities, strategic elements that we have to invest in, as opposed to the others that we might not want to do. So revolutionary theory is a bunch of choices that you're making about your analysis and about your proposals, right? And I think the main point that we reached very quickly as organizers, not in the book, we reached this conclusion before the book ever existed, which is, if we agree with Naomi Klein and if we agree with a bunch of other people, I mean, Naomi Klein is just a journalist, a very, very talented journalist, but not a theoretical person. So if we agree that climate crisis is caused by capitalism, and if we agree with climate crisis per se, like as a thing, then what does winning look like for me? The winning looks like for me that dismantling of capitalism in the short term becomes the desired outcome. And it comes directly embedded into the analysis of the current status of things, like gathering the capitalism information, let's say class information, and gathering also the climate information, which is the novelty. And then we're like, okay, that means that my task is to dismantle capitalism, global capitalism, with all of its complexity in the short term. That is the question that we are trying to answer. And this is the revolutionary theory that we are trying to play with in our practice.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe if you can go a bit deeper in more detail about how to, in your analysis, reach a point. Abolishing capitalism would be the goal or the process, but what does that mean like in practice? How should we approach movement building in a way that we can actually in practice achieve that goal? Not for it to be some kind of ideal faraway goal, but like a practical material goal that we want to reach. Not even within our lifetimes, but really like in the next, 10, 20 years. Because it's the only path that is compatible with avoiding that kind of runaway climate change that leads to like a world 10, 15 degrees warmer than the present, and where large parts of the world where all of us live would become uninhabitable probably in a few hundred years. So I'm just thinking if you can give more details about how building power to be able to do that, to be able to fight that fight, how does that look for you?
Yeah, I think the starting point, so when you say things like global capitalism, when I say these things, they come with a lot of weight. They are heavy to carry. Like, how can I possibly imagine having an influence, substantial influence in the short term in a place, say, 10,000 kilometers away from where I am? Like, I don't know these contexts. Like, I don't know what's going on in Argentina today. I have no access to what's going on in Lebanon today. Because I happen to live in the imperialist core, and these countries specifically have influence in these places. But like in terms of actual movement organizing, I don't know what's going on in other parts of the world. I even don't know what's going on in many parts of the country in which I am, like different social sectors, different demographics, different class compositions that I'm not really familiar with. And this applies not to me, right? This applies to any person, but it also applies to any organization. Because then the moment we launch this task to ourselves, like not avoid the task, like, we need to dismantle capitalism, global capitalism in the short term. Like when I say something like this, then I also have to find a way of integrating my particular standpoint and my particular intervention in the society in this bigger image. So it's kind of giving us some perspective on what we are supposed to do and what is supposed to happen and how to bridge that. I don't want to call it like lack of ambition, because all interventions are particular. All organizations work in limited. I don't remember where this was, but there was a sentence like, you can't organize the totality. And that's just ontological statement. Like you only organize inside totality, which means you're always part of something. But then if I want to change the totality, and in the short, and very soon, then I have to have a more ecological approach, a more ecosystemic approach, let's say, where I see myself within a larger landscape of organizations, groups, individuals even, but movements and struggles and campaigns, where my collective reside, where all of the collectives that I participate in reside, and nobody's going to catch us all. We will all have our functions, we will all have our, let's say, roles in it. And then not just recognizing that there is, let's say, some sort of diversity, but also be very intentional about it. The ecological word might mean two things. One is this just awareness that we live in an ecosystem and there are other elements and there are interactions. Many of them are complex, many of them are nonlinear, many of them are ambiguous, like it's not very clear what's going on and so on. But this is just pure ecosystem, right? It's just I'm making praxis with some awareness. The second part of the ecological way of thinking is being very intentional about it, because just saying diversity exists doesn't give me a direction of where I want to go, but we know where we want to go. So that means also handling diversity with intention. So some diversity is good, some diversity is not good. Some diversity is good when it's far away from each other. Like sometimes you want to put two plants, they are both essential, but if they are too close to each other, then they are detrimental to what you wanted to produce, right? Sometimes you want them, but far away and basically never interact. Maybe put different species in between them so that those two can have synergic interactions with each other and so on. So being very intentional about this ecosystem in which we live, and some of it is not good at all. Like certain things we just don't want, like in the ecosystem, which is me, I don't want cancer cells. When I have cancer, I'm not saying, there's diversity in my body. I say, yeah, there is biodiversity that I don't want because that's not the goal, right? So sometimes you might not just pick stuff away, and other things that on me, they are bad, like bacteria that are bad on me, but they are good on a dog. In some other animal, they are beneficial. When they come to me, they are not beneficial. So you might also just want to isolate it, not just destroy it, but just isolate so that we can both grow. And in other cases, I might want to just say, oh, wait, there is a diversity that is missing in me. You know, there's a specific vitamin that I should be having and I'm not having, so I should have it. And this applies to the movement, to the social movement as a whole. Like, what is missing? What are some interactions missing? And be very intentional about our role in contributing to this larger dynamic. So this is the proposal that we are making basically to movement organizers in All In.
As you were explaining, the image that came into my mind is building on this analogy of All In, like if you are playing poker or some kind of whatever game. And normally you could walk away if you don't agree. You're in an ecosystem where you fundamentally disagree with different groups, and then you can just think that you will not want to work together with them and just walk away, in the sense that think that, okay, I am going to do my thing, and maybe that will not forward the struggle, but maybe it just pushes the goal further in the future, and the next generation of people can actually achieve utopia or whatever. And the reality of climate change is what it's telling me. As you said, someone else put all of my chips in, so we no longer have the choice of walking away. And if we don't have the choice of walking away, then we seriously need to think of how to work within this movement ecology. This is what I was thinking as you were trying to explain. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, but I could add a bit more, say, subtlety to that, because the person that in your example is like walking away, but in this case, we are talking about like society and like working class, whatever you want to call it, the people. It's a collectivity. Because of that additional complexity, it's also interesting to understand, okay, given that we can't like just fold, how are we all gonna grow all in? Most of the time, the way we think of going all in is the way you describe it, which is what is causing a lot of the frustrations in more strictly vanguardist approaches, which is a group of people say, okay, we're going to do everything. And everything that we are doing is the right thing, and everything that others are doing are the wrong thing somehow. It can create this kind of dynamic. And I think it's interesting to notice that there are people on our, like, not behind us, but just next to us who are also doing stuff. Some of it can be bad, right? Some of it can be fascist, so it's just bad. But some of it can be just bad, as in like just bad left-wing politics. And we might want to distance ourselves from that, but at the same time see, okay, I want to distance myself, but even so, what's the complementarity here? Is there any? What's the relationship that I can build that is beneficial or the direction that we want to go, because we are already all in. How can I engage with this complexity? That is the novelty that you have in the book, given the novelty of climate crisis, which is the novelty of all in. Like, all in is a given. I'm not suggesting that we should go all in. I'm suggesting, given that we are going all in, what are we going to do now?
Collectively, yeah. Considering all of this information, what would you suggest for someone who's maybe starting out, maybe in their city there is one small, more radical, there is another, maybe a climate NGO active, but there's not clearly a big movement, and they are trying to position themselves. They have read your book and they have been inspired, but they just want to figure out what are some steps that they can do. I was wondering if you have some ideas or some wisdom to share about this.
I can try, and then Sinan add to what I'm saying. So yeah, as you said, reading the book is always a good idea, not because it's going to, to solve your problems, but it's a good frame to start discussions with other people. At least this is my experience. So yeah, I think that reading the book or reading together some chapters of the book, discussing it, would be really helpful. And then we already spoke about other books that can be read, for example, the Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything, but also other books, of course. My experience, and I don't have a long year experience with activism, but my experience is that, first of all, it's important to see who is really available to start. I'm not saying start a new organization, but to start being active or active again or do something more, etc. That willingness should be the starting point. So if you know some people which are maybe interested, but they're also a bit lacking of consistency, or they're not so sure about it or whatever, just focus on the people that you think are going to put themselves in some kind of project, and have some moments where you can listen to each other, because I think that sometimes emotions could be really helpful in doing this kind of job. But at the same time, that can be also an obstacle if there are always, I want to say, contaminating the environment of discussion, but still having a moment to free them. I think it's really important. And then at the end, discuss whether you agree with the frame of the book, whether you agree with the ruptural model, or if not, what is your theory of change? What do you think? It's something that you would do? Is it adapted to the frame of the book or not? And if your organization, if you already have one, is already doing something, how, according to you, these activities, this project of your organization can be embedded in the all-in project? In which sense? How can you contribute to the common goal? Of course, the all-in team is always really available to have discussions with people that are interested, to get involved, to organize workshops so that people can know better about what is their possible function in the ecosystem, how can they help to the common goal. Not look for people and organizations which are only aligned at the ideological level. The climate crisis is not an ideological level, no. It's a context, a common ground, a common context where we have to live and to change. So it's also important for me to find out different organizations, that people that could be really, really interested to help, even if maybe they're not the usual bubble organization or people, no? Because we all have in common this objectives to survive. So hopefully we can also see some surprises coming from different organizations.
Do you want to share how you got involved in the All-In project, Bea, if you want to?
Yeah, sure. Well, I found out about the book through social media or personal contacts. I don't remember. Then I think that I subscribed to the newsletter. I don't remember. So I also received some emails, I read some articles, and then I read the book. And my experience with the book was that it was nothing really new for me. It also helped me maybe to feel rooted again, and also to feel connected to something which puts in black on white pages everything that you already thought, and also offer a good frame, as I said, to discuss it with other people. So after that, I simply decided to be more active. And now I'm starting to spread it in Italy, to also find out other people and organizations that want to be involved in the project.
To end the episode, if you want to share some resources that you think are good to read, to listen to, could be books, websites, video channels, whatever you think would be useful here. And also, is there any place for people to follow your activity, if you want to share that?
Yeah. So I guess one of the things that the book caused in a nice way was exactly what Bea was saying. And actually, there are even more distant interactions where just a group of people come together and start reading and do something and then like report back to us just saying like this happened. And now we want to like listen to what you say or share something or this is going on or whatever. Like there's that kind of dynamic that is really, really nice. More, let's say, organically in the sense of building actual bridges. The book has a website and a bunch of social media accounts in case like websites don't work for you. But I guess the safest way to see what we're doing is the newsletter because of how social media is organized nowadays, right? Most of the stuff, past and future activity, we share on newsletter, everything that involves other people somehow. More interestingly, because the book is not a book and it doesn't really come with a full recipe, but more like a framework to build recipes together, we immediately launched the book with the website, and the website has 2 sections that are really, really curious, and they actually went better than I initially expected. So one part is All In Applied, which are articles from movement organizers who reflect on specific examples of some of the concepts of the book. Somebody did some movement level intervention, some campaigning, some strategizing, or maybe it's historical, like 100 years ago. Maybe it's just happened like 2 years ago. Or maybe it could happen in a couple of months. So you're seeing some opportunity arising and you're like, we should do something about it because it's really, again, the whole conversation of like what is central, what is not central to change. You might see something that really should shift the priorities of the movement as a whole, and you might want to produce some strategic thinking together. So All In Applied articles are articles where the main framework of All In is kind of taking more embodiment in real life. So that's one thing. And then there's the 6th chapter of the book. So the book has 6 chapters. 5 of them are in the book. And the 6th is like a bunch of tools for organizers, beginner organizers, but also experienced organizers to play with it in their context. Like, how can I think of strategy? How can I think of my organization? What can I do differently? And what are the tools available and so on? And that is an interesting chapter. We call it the 6th chapter because it really has very little material that is produced by us. It's more material that exists elsewhere that we thought was really productive and effective for the kind of stuff that All In tries to achieve. So it's not just yet another, toolbox, skill set, whatever, training material, like compilation of all of those things. Partly it is that, but partly it's like filtered through some sort of approach that we are picking. So we are guiding people to a lot of really interesting organizers tools that are available. Those are actually very specific checklists, but also entire websites, some videos, and so on. So people can look at all of those things. So it's very hard for me to give you a list of stuff to check, but more like if you go there to the 6th chapter, you will actually have an ongoing live list of material that we discover through our new networks that are being created through this project that we then share with the rest of the movement that we're in contact with.
We will definitely link the parts of the website with those tools. It was a great discussion, and I think, as you said, I really hope that all these ideas are generative and lead to mushrooming of other initiatives and projects, and maybe to give people some direction and some conceptual tools to frame their own actions. Thanks so much for offering us your time and energy, and it was great to hear from you.
Thank you, Robbie.
Thanks for having us.
This is a fully listener-supported podcast, and with the price of one coffee or a beer each month, you can help us continue this work by subscribing to our Patreon. As usual, we will close off the episode with a short how-to section in which one of our guests, Sinan, from the organization Climaximo, with whom we talked with about their book All In, a revolutionary theory to stop climate collapse. Sinan will tell us about an example of how Climaximo tried to organize in the face of a crisis with this movement ecology mindset or framing. So I'll pass it on to Sinan.
The example that I can give how to do this kind of work happened actually very recently in a meeting of Climaximo, well, in a series of meetings in Climaximo, which was when the US aggressions became really, let's say, volatile. There was the capturing, the kidnapping of Maduro, and then attacks in Iran. And in the meantime, like Lebanon being bombed by Israel and so on. Like there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things happened at the same time. And here in Portugal, we didn't really have a good response to it. The social movements didn't have a good response to it. That was also the time that Europe was discussing Greenland being invaded or taken over or whatever. Like that is the status. And our analysis at that point, like intuition, let's say, was people are ready. Masses of people are really, really discontent with this kind of bullying coming from the US. Even like center wing sections of the society, even middle class, petit bourgeois sections of society are really frustrated with this kind of bullying. We have a good moment to mobilize like tens of thousands of people to the street. That is the task. And we also said, if our group, which is a climate justice group, like Action Group in Lisbon, if we call for it, would that work? And the answer is no, because we have a topic, not because we think we have a topic, but because the society thinks we have a topic, which is climate, right? Like fossil fuels and so on, which does work for Iran and Venezuela, but doesn't work for Greenland necessarily. At least that's not how it was framed, or for Cuba and so on. So we were like, okay, we are not the right people. Who could be the right people? And then we had like a brainstorming of like, if this is the group and that is the group, but then that belongs to another bubble and that produces another bubble, like others will be allergic to that kind of public call for action. Then we made some phone call saying, this is our intuition. Do you agree with this? How do you think we could approach? Because we are also very frustrated because we are part of the social movement and we are frustrated that nobody's doing anything about it, to the extent that we are almost like on the fence, like borderline making a call, but we don't want to make the call because it will spoil the momentum. And then we checked with a lot of people. All of this happened in less than 24 hours. So we were just like, this needs to happen, because that was the time when Trump said, like tweeted, but he never says anything. Tweeted that he would destroy the civilization of Iran or whatever. That was the moment that, like, if that ever happens, like if there is a qualitative escalation, then there has to be an emergency mobilization. And then we checked with different groups, different organizations coming from housing, social movements, some of the political parties as well. Like we just created some space of dialogue, let's say, or multilogue or whatever you want to call it, where we're like, okay, let's explore together. What is it? And then immediately, like in the same 24 hours, there was an emergency call where we agreed, okay, so we're going to call for vigils in these environments, and then we will set up the rest of the process, and who else should we check, and so on. So this is the kind of dynamic that came from a frustration inside Climaximo, which was shared by others, but somehow like we were unarticulated or uncoordinated in our frustration. So we created the space of like, let's talk. And then we found a way of like, okay, so in this way, maybe we can get the result that we want, which is tap into the frustration and discontentment in the population at large and find the right way of mobilizing those people to the streets in a way that is radical, in a way that is inclusive of different priorities and sensibilities that people might bring to the street at that time. That is the kind of thing that we did, being well aware of our positioning. What is the strength that we have? And what are the strengths necessary to do what we think should happen? And then look for those strengths elsewhere and see if we can combine them, if we can articulate them in a way that is beneficial for the movement as large. Because if we don't do any of these things, from my perspective, like where the Climaximo group is specifically standing, Venezuela and then now Iran and so on, these are also locking us into a fossil fuel future. So I don't want this to happen. Like even if I was really limited to my silo of like fossil fuels, even in that very limited vision, I needed these mobilizations to happen, right? And of course, we don't see it this way. We see like climate justice movement as part of the anti-capitalist movement. So we really think like these things growing are beneficial in general, in the medium term and in the long term. So this is the approach that we picked. Then we checked with our allies, our comrades, or sometimes like just partners, let's say, other groups in the movement, and we reflected back to us. And then, so this is the kind of reaction that we consider interesting when we have a movement level approach rather than like your organizational perspective, which by definition is limited.
I'm thinking whether there was a moment in that process that you could identify, like seeing that group would be better to make the call because they are, I don't know, grounded in some way or represent some segment of society or yeah, I'm thinking even more concretely than you described how we can see the process unfolding.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to give it more concrete because it wasn't a sequence of actions. It was a sequence of conversations that happened offline and online. The curious part about this experience, and I mean, this is just one example of a thing that we did regularly, but this happened just a couple of months ago. This is why it's very live in my head. The curious thing about this experience is avoid the temptation that us, my group, should say something about it or do something about it, right? Just because it's bad and we are worried, just go back and check, does this opportunity or threat, does this external factor combine well with the strengths of my organization specifically? And then if not, what else am I supposed to do? For instance, if it is really just about like a new fossil fuel project anywhere, then I know that Climaximo is the best situated organization, or at least one of the best situated organizations to talk about it. But when it is something else, some other topic, at least it's framed differently in the public space, independent of how I read it, then I'm like, okay, then I have to find a way of being part of a larger intervention that is not limited to my particular group. Resisting that temptation of like, oh, we have to do something, and more like something has to be made, and then check what are we supposed to do in relation to that thing that needs to be made, rather than if something needs to be made, we just have to do it. I think that is the interesting dynamic here that is sometimes hard to sustain in a way that is like emotionally difficult because it gives you a lot of frustration if something needs to be done and seems like nobody's doing it. It's a bit frustrating also to just like recognize that even if you did it, it would be just yet another small group doing something about it.
That's all for today. If you would like to support us, you can do that by interacting with and sharing our episodes on social media and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Or for those of you who would like to help us financially also, you can do that by subscribing to our Patreon or with a one-time donation through Ko-fi. As you know, there has been a quite severe legal crackdown on climate groups all around Europe in recent years, coupled with the rise of the far right in many countries who are very fossil fuel friendly. It's becoming quite difficult to do climate activism, especially in countries like Romania, where the movement is very small and hasn't reached a critical mass yet. So with that in mind, first of all, we would hope for this project to reach a stage where we can cover a part-time income for some of our members who are involved in the climate movement here. And after a certain threshold is reached, we would like also to redistribute this money to other groups and individuals doing important work on climate here in Romania and in the broadly defined Eastern Europe and the Balkans. So even a $2 subscription would mean a lot to us. Well, that was our show. Until next time, take care, be kind to each other, but also organize to fight back.